La'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. So last week, because this was one of the good times where we were studying together last week and this week, we were at the third of 4 weeks or Parshiot about Joseph. And in the last week, Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. He sent his sons back home and asked them to, bring my father, tell my father I'm alive. And they took their whole family. There's a very interesting sentence that we're not getting into because I did it in women's Torah study that they list all the children and they list one girl, one granddaughter named Sarah. And they say that she was one of the people who went to Egypt, returned to Egypt with the original family of Jacob. And then there's a big to-do because when hundreds of years later, when the Israelites are about to enter the land after slavery in the Red Sea and Mount Sinai and everything, she's listed as going back into the land. So there's a big question about how did she live all these years, but we're not working on that. We're not talking about that today. What we're talking about today is the relationship between Joseph and his brothers. And there's an attitude, interestingly. Hi, Jan, nice to see you. There's an interesting attitude that goes both ways. We know that the brothers were jealous, and we know that, and we'll see that after their father dies, if we get that far, because we have a lot to cover, the brothers are worried that now Joseph's going to take revenge. Now that Jacob has passed away, now he's going to really take revenge, which he doesn't. So we always see the brothers in kind of this negative or suspicious or, let's say, challenging light. But there's an interesting, and most people, when they study the story, it kind of ends with the great reunion, and then everybody comes back to the land and they live happily ever after for several hundred years. But that is not what's in the Torah. There's a lot more to the story. And I'm going to share the screen and show you. And there's a thing that Joseph does that most people don't know as the second in command in Egypt during the famine, because there are 5 more years of famine at the point of when the family decides to relocate into Egypt and Goshen and have this better life. So let's look at this for a second. And this is in the Vayechi, Joseph and his brothers. Okay, I'm going to look at this. So I'm going to go to this place right here because this is really interesting. First of all, by the way, as they list, everybody's children and sons and whatever, they say Joseph, who was Joseph in Egypt, he had 2 sons, Manasseh, they say Manasseh in Hebrew, English, Manasseh and Ephraim. And he was whom Asnat, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore him. So his wife was Asnat, and she's the daughter of Potiphar, the priest. Now, does that name Potiphar remind you of any name you might have heard before?
Potiphar.
Exactly. There's a possibility that he actually ended up marrying the daughter of Potiphar, who was the man that he was a slave to. This is the one that he was sold to originally in the very beginning of his entrance into Egypt, and whose wife, Potiphar's wife, tried to seduce him. So it's interesting. The rabbis say it's a possibility this Potiphar is actually Potiphar, and that he ended up marrying into that family. So I just thought that was an interesting little note that you might like to know. And then they go, okay, so they return back to Egypt. And, that's where most people think the story ends, but no. So I want to read this thing about, and I want to analyze Joseph's character from this little section. So who would like to just read this first 1, 2, 3, 4 lines? Let's just start with that. Who would like to read that?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay, we're at 1, 2, 3, and 4.
And Joseph said to his brothers,
I got you. Then Joseph said, thank you. Then Joseph said to his brothers, to his father's household, I will go up and tell news to Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. They have always been breeders of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and all that is theirs. So when Pharaoh summons you and asks, what is your occupation? You shall answer, your servants have been breeders of livestock from the start until now, both we and our fathers, so that you may stay in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are born in Egypt, to Egyptians.
Okay. So what is he basically telling his brothers to do?
Lie.
To lie. Who said that? Yes, Marilyn, why?
Well, because the Egyptians hated shepherds, so he wanted them to not to be liked immediately.
And also it would reflect bad on him, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're yokels, basically, you're hayseeds. You don't even live in homes. You live in tents. You wander around. I live in this palace. Egyptians were a highly sophisticated civilization. This was a pretty primitive civilization at this point. There were, and he says, so, let's just not mention that you're shepherds. Let's say you're breeders of livestock. That sounds a little more high class. So he says that to his brothers. Okay. So what's your, what would you think? How would they respond to that? How would you think they would respond to that suggestion? And he's, given them a lot and brought them all this stuff. So what's your opinion? There's no wrong answer. It's your opinion. Merle, what's your opinion?
I'm just trying to think about this in the sense that, we were with friends last week who she has to brag about everything. And so I feel like this is something where he's trying to explain to them, he's trying to make them brag or lie about who they are and what they do, which isn't a good thing.
He had some, yes. So, okay. Any other comments about how living in Egypt has influenced him, actually, is another way to look at it. Any opinions about that?
I think that he wants to be better than what he's imagined to be.
You think Joseph wants to be better? I don't think Joseph could be any better, but
I think that's what he's
relatives were embarrassed by, and we don't necessarily want going. Okay, Penina, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, yes, he's trying to make them to tell Pharaoh that they're actually owners of things. They're not just shepherd for somebody else, maybe. That he wants to show that they own something, that they have stocks. It's not, they are breeding them, they own them. Instead of just working for somebody else maybe, or being low grade, just shepherd who doesn't own necessarily their flocks.
I think they own their flocks, but they don't.
Yes, they do, but he wants them to tell that that's what they do.
But he also, being a shepherd and, the way they dress, the way they live, the way they travel around, and it's very rural. And he's very urban and urbane, very sophisticated, his clothing,
also, it's the fact of the ownership that they own.
present a better image of themselves.
Right. So then we go on to see what the brothers do. And then we could talk about that. Brad, yes.
Well, I think I would call this realpolitik. He knows what's going to work in this political system. He's been acculturated to it, and he's giving them some very realistic advice based upon his experience.
I have to laugh because I just rewatched, I don't know, for some reason, The Blind Side recently, with Sandra Bullock about the family adopting the African-American boy who ends up becoming a huge a football player. And I forgot that in there, they hire a tutor for him when he's failing. And it's, what's her name? You know, she's such a great actress. I can't think of her name, but anyway, she says,
Kathy Bates?
yes, Kathy Bates. And she says, well, I have to tell you something before you hire me. This is taking place in Tennessee. I'm a Democrat. And then the wife, later they say, who knew we would have a black son before we ever met a Democrat? and the idea that, you know, she didn't reveal it or doesn't reveal that she's a Democrat in Tennessee. And here Joseph saying, you know, I don't know that you necessarily have to mention that you're shepherds to the Egyptian royalty. Okay, so then let's see what happens. So Brad, why don't you read this?
Wait a second.
Then Joseph came and reported to Pharaoh.
Then Joseph came and reported to Pharaoh, saying, my father and my brothers, with their flocks and herds and all that is theirs, have come from the land of Canaan and are now in the region of Goshen. And selecting a few of his brothers, he presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? They answered Pharaoh, we, your servants, are shepherds, as were also our fathers.
So the brother completely ignored him, stuck it to him in a way and said, well, we're shepherds. Just, you know, they didn't listen to a word he said. So there's some tension there, I think, between the Joseph and the brothers and how they sensed he was ashamed of them. And but they're very respectful to Pharaoh. So continue, Brad. They told Pharaoh.
We have come, they told Pharaoh, to sojourn in this land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, the famine being severe in the land of Canaan. Pray then, let your servants stay in the region of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, as regards your father and your brothers who have come to you, the land of Egypt is open before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them stay in the region of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, put them in charge of my livestock.
So Pharaoh was more magnanimous and less judgmental than Joseph. You know what I mean? And so how do you think this played out in terms of their relationship going forward? What do you think? I mean, how would you imagine they would? I mean, they got a really good deal, but yet, what do you think? I mean, what's your opinion of how their relationship, was it equal, even though they're all brothers and he's welcoming them, do you think?
No.
Mm-mm.
How so? How would it be?
I think they're still jealous of him, but they have to keep their mouths shut.
They're jealous of him, and it's very clear that, you know, they're not on the same level. But this is a good Pharaoh. I mean, I talked about this last week, that Egypt is never considered, even despite this enslavement, an enemy of Israel or of the Judeans, of Judah, whatever. Even though there were some problems, they were never considered an enemy, and they were never cursed or never labeled or whatever. And we see that the Pharaoh is very fond of Joseph and very generous. And not only that, he says, okay, we don't have shepherds here. So if you have any really good ones, we can, you know, put them in charge of my livestock. So he sets them up in sort of a very good situation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I think there are two other ways that you could look at this. This passage is so multivalent. One, you could say that Joseph, despite having been in Pharaoh's household for all of these years, still is an outsider and doesn't really understand Pharaoh, even though He's been part of that civilization. He really doesn't know his boss as well as he thinks he does. And the other way you could interpret this is that maybe Pharaoh, the picture of Pharaoh is that Pharaoh is so capricious, you can never tell from one minute to the next when you're dealing with a totalitarian leader how they're going to react. So this opens up many levels of interpretation, it seems to me.
I agree. And there's a third interpretation that he's still an outsider with his brothers.
Mhm.
He's still not part of the family because he doesn't really relate to what they do. And he's still separated from them and, at this point, embarrassed by them, but he never really was accepted by them or accepted them. There was always this gulf between them. So you're right. It's a very interesting dynamic in multiple generations. That's a really cool idea that Pharaoh's so capricious that he's nice one day, the next day kill him, who knows? I like that. Now he brings his father to present him to Pharaoh. So he's brought some of his brothers. We don't know which ones. Probably, I don't know, maybe Benjamin for sure, but the others, I don't know. And this is how the interaction between Jacob and Pharaoh happened. So who would like to read that? Come on, you're all good readers.
I can't get it big enough to read
Not big enough?
for me because I'm on my tablet,
I
my
agree.
computer.
Susan, can you enlarge it?
I just did. How's that?
Read.
Not large enough?
Yeah.
I'll
Okay,
read.
okay, Natalie.
Joseph then brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob greeted Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Jacob, "How many are the years of your life?" And Jacob answered Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespans of my fathers during their sojourns."
So,
Then,
hold 1 second. So he's saying, I lived 130. I had a hard life. And we could look through his life, and he had a lot of ups and downs. And my life is not as long as my father's, meaning Abraham lived longer and Isaac lived longer. So he could even be saying, the stress of my life shortened my life, that my
Mhm.
life. And he says, few have been the years of my life, 130.
yeah, well,
We should all live that few. And but I haven't lived as long as my father's. I guess he's sensing that he isn't going to either. Okay, continue, Natalie.
then Jacob bade Pharaoh farewell and left Pharaoh's presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. All right, it's not going up. All right, here. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread, down to the little ones.
Okay, so now this is very interesting. Joseph, sets up his family and he takes care of them. But then, and most people who study Torah do not know this part. I mean, unless, you really,
Yeah.
most typical people only know the story of Joseph up till here, if this far. But now Joseph does something I want to know what you think of what he does now. I want your opinion of it because I think it's controversial. Joseph gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Joseph brought the money to Pharaoh's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for the money is gone." So he basically charged people for the rations until they had nothing left. And Joseph said, bring your livestock and I will sell to you against your livestock as the money is going. So now give me your animals. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle and the asses. Thus he provided them with the bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal save our persons and our farmland. All we have left is our land and our bodies. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become a waste. So Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, every Egyptian having sold his field because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land passed over to Pharaoh, and he removed the population town by town from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he not take over, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the lot which Pharaoh had made for them. Therefore, they did not sell their land.
Oh gosh.
Then Joseph said to the people, whereas I have this day acquired you and your land for Pharaoh, here is seed for you to sow the land. And when the harvest comes, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be yours as seeds for the fields and as fruit for you and those in your households as nourishment for your children. And they said, you have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be serfs to Pharaoh. And Joseph made it into a land law in Egypt, which is still valid, that 1/5 should be Pharaoh's. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the country of Egypt in the region by Goshen. They acquired holdings in it and were fertile and increased greatly. Okay. What do you think about that?
May I say, I think he's a shrewd businessman, but in the end, the Israel prospered and we increased greatly, and there were blessings, but he was
One
shrewd.
point of view. What's it? Any other opinions about what he did? What else he could have done? What do we think of it? What do you think of that? Oh, Penina.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, it brings me back to this thing that he told them to say that they are
Not shepherds.
they are not plain shepherd, that they have, because that's what they needed. They needed, there was a famine there, or at least a beginning of a famine. So here they are, and they are coming with a whole bunch of food, a whole bunch of way to sustain all Egypt. If they are breather and they know what they're doing, and they're going to be able to produce cows and sheep or whatever.
Took over everything. Joseph.
Yeah, but then
everything.
Yes, and then it brings me to what happened in Europe, that they used to put the Jews as the collectors of taxes. So the population will eat the tax collector, not the king who had the decree to collect all this tax from them. Even when they were so poor, they had to pay to the king. So here it's the same thing. He put him in charge of all this. Now he's in charge, and if there is any animosity, then he gets it. Joseph gets it, not the king. Because he goes, he collects, he decides who is going to pay, and the decree comes from him. It's like he was a very good politician, this Pharaoh. He didn't let them in just like that because of Joseph. He let them in because they were a good source of food.
I don't think those 70 people who came in had much to do with the source of food. Joseph had stored food.
Because they put them in the best part of the land. They could still breed.
That's possible.
Pay attention.
We don't know. He probably didn't take away their livestock and make them serfs, his family. Okay, any other opinion?
Eretz Goshen, which was the best part of Egypt.
Right. They gave them the best. Okay, yes, Ray, are you raising your hand?
I am.
Good.
And I think his actions are unconscionable. These people were not bargaining from an equal position. They were under duress. He took advantage of them. if Moses said, let my people go, Joseph said, let my people be slaves. And there is no compassion here. We have a principle, we have Rahmanas, the principle that Joseph his actions were evil in my mind. He enslaved and impoverished these people for not only for them, but in eternity by making this a statute, so to speak, in the land. And I think his actions were that of a man without a conscience or a moral compass.
Yeah, and it seems like he's become a real Egyptian. You know what I mean? And the rabbis try to justify Joseph because, they have to justify everybody, all our forefathers, by saying that, the Egyptians didn't mind, that they were used to being enslaved, or they already felt that they were Pharaoh's property, so this was no big deal for them. But this is the rabbis, not the Egyptians, and you see they are desperate. They are desperate, and this is not, I don't think this puts Joseph in a good light. Personally, myself, I agree with you.
I think he demonstrated through his whole life that he was a lone wolf. We don't see in the readings that he had close connections with really anybody. There's very little to talk about between him and his wife. His connection with Potiphar or the Pharaoh or his brothers or anybody. He's on his own. He's maybe because he was viewed as an outcast. And I think there are probably reasons for that. I don't know if you discussed that in the past, but I think he had some gender issues. And
interesting. No, that he was a favorite. He was like the Papa's boy favorite. So he was
right.
He was a favorite, right?
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Everything he did is, from my perspective, was for himself. I don't think he cared about people, and I think his actions here were in concert with the rest of his life.
Thank you. Interesting, Brad.
Well, I think there are a couple things going on here. I think in a sense it's an origin kind of story. It's sort of looking back and trying to explain how do we get to this point where 1/5 of the of prophets inure to Pharaoh. How did we get there? And telling us, giving us the a myth as to how that came about. Hannah, I think we're hearing your piano.
No, that's Donut. Don't play your piano.
No, I'm not playing my piano. I wouldn't do that.
Oh, who's playing piano? Somebody has.
Hannah.
Not me.
I think it was Hannah.
Oh, Hannah.
Yeah, she's lighting up.
And the other thing is that the other point I'd want to make, and I'm not going to disagree with Ray in terms of how we read this, but if you read the perspective of the Torah, does not seem to look upon Joseph unfavorably.
No.
In fact, it looks upon him very favorably.
That's right.
So there's a bit of a disconnect possibly between what we as the readers may, with our 20th century, 21st century, attitudes may see and what the writers of this text saw.
And also we know that serfdom existed, for multiple, generations where people were attached to the land. Medieval Europe, it was all serfs.
Mhm.
So, but I still think I still have a problem with the way he never even considered another option, like reducing the price, saying it's collateral. When it's over, I'll give it back to you. I'm going to hold it now, and then once
I agree with you, Rabbi.
moment the famine ends, and you can start planting again. You can redeem some of your property. There was never any of that, and I think the Talmud, which 1,000 years later, is very careful to talk about, interest and redeeming and taking things from poor people and how you need to return it. Don't keep it even overnight and things like that. So, yeah.
Empathy.
Yeah, and we evolved. What I love about Judaism, that yeah, this happened, but we've rethought this. We have evolved. We created statutes that this would never happen.
Mhm.
In Talmud times. Yes, Carrie.
Why do we revere Joseph?
Well, Joseph, according to the story, he came and he saved his whole family, and he saved all of Egypt by prophesying that there would be this terrible famine that would destroy the whole region, and saying we need to prepare during the time of plenty and storing food so that we'll be able to survive this. So that's that's why. And also, I talked about this last week. I think the story of Joseph encompasses every aspect of human nature, that there's, through all the characters, we see jealousy, we see greed, we see remorse, we see regret, we see suffering, we see sex, we see, lying, we see every aspect of human nature in this 4-week story. It's the longest story in the whole Torah on one person. And so we find things to identify with or disagree with and discuss and learn from. So I think that's one of the benefits of the story. Cindy, and then Susan.
Well, I think the other reason he's so key is he gets the whole mishpucha down to Egypt. And if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't be in Egypt later to be enslaved. And we get the whole story of the Exodus. So he's key to that.
Rashi says, we were slaves all because of a multicolored coat. Because of a multicolored coat, we became slaves. So, if Jacob hadn't given Joseph the coat and his brothers didn't feel so neglected and so jealous, they would have the whole story wouldn't have happened. So it also is like that butterfly effect of how one action can have a domino effect for negative or positive. So you have to really look at what you do. Susan.
And he's so key that his bones are carried
back
when they leave.
Yes. Susan.
Well, I'm not for cancel culture here. And a Torah study with Rabbi Leader a while ago, before this, he really was very positive of Joseph, and I am too. I think this was a miscalculation, and yes, maybe he didn't think of interest in taking, and it was a good point that also led to the Talmud to institute those laws. But his actions, other than the youth when he was a braggart, he really developed beautifully. And I don't think he was so self-centered. When he was in the prison, he interpreted the dreams. Now both weren't good. He resisted Potiphar's wives, and for very noble reasons too, that it would have hurt his master, and his master entrusted him. And he assimilated, in fact, I hope I'm quoting correctly, those of you who heard Rabbi Leader, he became almost like a modern Jew in assimilating into this culture and maintaining his identity. And he always believed in God too. Well, he was he's not a patriarch, but he didn't encounter God as his father and forefathers had, but he always said this was God. I interpreted the dreams, but it wasn't just me; it was God's, and he was one that looked positively on life. I think that he's a noble character, and this.
Okay, I totally agree with everything you said, but does that mean he's perfect? Do you think his behavior toward the starving Egyptians? I agree with all of what you said, but what I think makes all of our Torah characters interesting. Even Moses, oh my God, he hit the rock. He said, I'm sick of these people, I quit. I mean, which makes him identifiable. Do we still, or how do you feel or others feel about the way that he handled the starving Egyptians in their time of need?
No, that was not the best solution.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm not canceling Joseph.
Maybe it was wrong, but I don't think you cancel him.
No, but We're not canceling at
But
all.
to say all these other horrible things about him, and I don't think.
No, well, just in terms of this particular event, but I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's what makes it so great. All right, so wait. Penina, Natalie, and then Brad. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, his family was always protected in that particular situation. If they paid, they could afford it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have stayed there. So we know that the things were so bad that when Moses took him out of Egypt, so many non-Jewish people followed. There were only 70 people who went down to Egypt, and then 600,000 left. That shows you how bad things were. So I think he did the best that he could come up with at the time to that the Pharaoh should sustain his kingdom or whatever. And his family at all this time was protected, because it says that when the new Pharaoh, the time of the slavery, it was a new Pharaoh who never knew Joseph.
Yeah,
In
right.
other words, the influence of Joseph was not there anymore to protect people. So everybody was into slavery, not just the Jewish people, everybody. But the Jews were always a different section. So they started by having their baby boys thrown into the river to reduce the population.
Right.
This is something that happened to a Pharaoh through a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. It says,
I understand. Okay, you're right, but we're just focusing on this one section about Joseph. So I want to hear what Natalie has to say, and then Brett.
Well, I'd like to take the discussion back to the pit at the very beginning of this story, because, the Bible opens up with the first story about humans, that Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel. That the Bible is telling you that man has the ability to do these horrible things, a brother against a brother. Now, in this story, back to the pit, these brothers, not only did they want to kill him, but they threw him into a pit thinking he was going to starve slowly to die, the worst kind of death in the middle of the desert. And here we go further on to the story where we see Joseph is not so angry with them. He is taking care of them. I could understand it more when first he wants to get his father over, or maybe his brother Benjamin. But we're talking about what a terrible person he became. But he never punishes those brothers for killing him. And to me, that is almost unbelievable in the story, because of his power, because of his ability to let them go easily without any guilt. And I find a lot of trouble with the story and about us accusing Joseph of being such a horrible, selfish man, if we take it back to the brothers. So I'd like to hear what people say about that.
Okay, so I'm going to let Brad in a second, but I just want to say we're not saying he's a horrible man. We're asking about this particular business practice or whatever he did at this particular point. We're not saying he's horrible at all. He loves he forgives, he loves, he gives, he came up with it, blah, blah, blah. But this particular thing, is it because he was very Egyptianized? Is it because he needed to please Pharaoh? Did Pharaoh, could he not give things out? Maybe Pharaoh said, you're not allowed, make sure that there's a profit, or what am I getting out of it? I gave you all the stuff. Where's my payback? We don't know. All I'm saying is we're just looking at his behavior in this little section and discussing how we feel about it. It doesn't mean we don't love him. I mean, we could talk about Jacob lying, stealing the birthright. I mean, every Abraham sacrificing Isaac without even saying one word. He never even says no, he just does it. So, what, we're just not vilifying, but we're examining. Okay, Brad, you've been very patient.
Well, I'm going to answer by going back to your comment there about Rashi saying that we were enslaved because of a Technicolor coat.
Right.
In fact, we were enslaved because that was God's plan. And that's what we're forgetting.
Well,
The hero of this story is not Joseph. The hero of this story is God. In the same way that the Exodus story, the hero of that story is God.
Amen.
And that we needed to be enslaved in order to be freed. And to be freed, we needed God to do that for us. And I don't think you can read these two stories independently. I think they have to be read together. And this is a story about God's plan for us. And Joseph is a tool in that plan.
Okay, I like that. I'm gonna call on Merle in 1 second. My question as a 21st century person reader is, why was that the plan, and what was the benefit of the plan? Because I don't think they didn't come out so great afterwards. They didn't learn. They didn't have any like insight, wisdom. They were just so downtrodden and had such a slave mentality. So you're right. It's kind of like we were enslaved, and then we go, and this is how we got there. But what was the plan is the question. But I want to hear from Merle. Yes.
I'm thinking that I wrote notes here. Wait a minute. I don't really know who the real influence here, whether it was Pharaoh, whether it was God. We don't know. It's kind of like other things. We're not seeing a plan. We're just seeing the aftermath of whatever happened,
right.
And what was the plan, and what was the plan intending to do.
Right. And, I want to say in the text, and then I'm going to call on Pamela because I see your hands up. In the text earlier, there's, and biblical scholars say it was put in later. God says to Abraham, your people will be enslaved at some point, and then they'll be freed. And there's this like prediction that this is going to happen, but scholars say that this was written after the story of the Exodus. They went back and said it was all part of this divine plan that it would happen. Okay, Pamela.
So my thought was, maybe this is an instance of a sort of do as I, a negative lesson, in that this is perhaps a story of Joseph following his boss's orders and kind of just doing his job. So if this was the prevailing business practice of the day, what we're really saying is, was it incumbent upon him to break ranks, not to do what, the chain of command said, and to think for himself and not necessarily, and look kind of farther down the road. For example, like modern day, you can look at Michael Cohen, who is that was his name? The fixer, Donald Trump's fixer, right? His job was to be Donald Trump's lawyer, and he did his job as probably most lawyers would do in his position. He was being well paid. He did his job. And what he was doing was odious. And now we look at him and say, well, you should have known better. You shouldn't have done your job. And to me, those examples are kind of analogous. Like what we're saying is Joseph should have known better, right? But he was doing his job, perhaps.
Yes. And, we will, we only have like 15 minutes. I really want to go to the next Parsha where Jacob blesses Joseph among all. And, look at this, the way that the other brothers and Joseph compared to the other brothers, and Joseph compared, it's like Noah in his time was the best person, and Joseph was perhaps doing the best that he could do for everyone, because the people did live. They had to give up stuff, but that he was gaining for Pharaoh. So it's a great controversy, but let's just go. I know you want to talk to me, but I just want to move to, because Jacob's deathbed blessings of his sons, because they're fascinating. And that's in the next Parsha, which is actually this week's Torah portion. We haven't even gotten to it. I want to show it to you. It's here it is, share. It's okay, well, this is the same, and oh, this is all the same, and then here. Okay, so here I can do it this way, actually. This is when, hold on. Okay.
48.
Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So this is interesting. And the reason I want you to look at this is because this is the blessing that we give. The tradition is to give your sons on Friday night, comes from here. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and he was told to Joseph, your son Joseph has come to you. And Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. You know, I have to, again, just stop and say the detail, the description, the narrative of this story is so unlike everything else in the Torah. The way it's like a novel. He sat up in bed, he gathered his strength. I mean, these little details we don't find anywhere else. I don't think it's just like Moses said to, or Moses felt this or whatever, but here it's like so descriptive. It's amazing. And and we can really see it. Him pulling himself up in his bed. And he said, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. Yeah, we didn't have a chance. God blessed him and said, behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession, meaning Canaan. That's what he said to him before he left. And now your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. And we know that when it came to the tribes and getting holdings, these brothers each got holdings. Joseph, there's no holding for our tribe of Joseph, but Manasseh and Ephraim each had their own tribes. And as for me, and now this is interesting. Pam, are you have your hand up still, or is that from before? Okay. As for me, I came from Padam to my sorrow. Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way there, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrat, and I buried her on the way. So first of all, he's apologizing that your mother was not buried in the land of Canaan, in the cave of the Machpelah. I couldn't take her there. So there's some apology here for that. And we know the tomb of Rachel is near Hebron. And when Joseph saw okay, so now I feel like this is a little bit of Alzheimer's because he just saw them and he goes, he sees the sons and he goes, who are these? So it's like dementia or what? It's like, these are my sons. You just blessed them. Who are they again? I think that's interesting.
He's going blind.
Who has God given me? Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. And the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so he could not see. And Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said, I never expected to see your face. Oh, it's again so full of emotion. And behold, God let me see your offspring too. I never expected to see you, and now I'm seeing your children. And Joseph removed them from they were on his lap. And he said, who are they? And he bowed, and he took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel. He wanted him to bless Manasseh because he was the oldest with his right, and Ephraim with his left. And he switched, and he laid his right hand on Ephraim, which is, again, this whole thing of the younger son getting the blessing over and over. It's always the younger son. And he said, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life, long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys and let them, and then let my name be carried on, and my name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and grow into a multitude. And his father, Joseph says, Father, you have the hands on the wrong people. He saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim. It displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said, not this way, Father, my father. This is one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. Fathers refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He shall also become a people, and he shall also be great. Nevertheless, his younger son shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them by saying, may God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. So that, by the way, is what you say to your son on Friday night. Your sons, you bless them, you say, may God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. Why Ephraim and Manasseh? Why not, any other Jewish sons? Anybody know why he picked it?
He's apparently got along.
I'm
And
sorry, what, Susan?
it has been said that these two brothers we don't know, but didn't have the hostility of
Yes, the first set of brothers who weren't trying to kill each other or fight or whatever. But what do you make of this idea? Over and over again, the younger son succeeds and rules over the older. We see it, Isaac over Ishmael, Jacob over Esau. Joseph, actually, I guess Benjamin's just like too young to count, but Joseph ends up ruling over all his brothers. These stories. And Moses, by the way, is the youngest of Aaron and Miriam. There's the three of them, but Moses is the youngest and he's the one. So what does that mean, do you think?
I kind of like it.
David's also the youngest. I've never liked that because I'm the oldest. And when I first started, it was like, what is this? It's really unfair. Usually they say it counteracts primogeniture, that the long-lasting tradition that the oldest inherits everything. And then I think if they say because of that too, God is protecting the youngest, who is supposedly the weakest, but it's not necessarily the case. What's interesting here, I just found, it just occurred to me, Jacob is repeating what happened with Isaac and himself, in the sense that Isaac couldn't see well, and now you say it's Alzheimer's, but it's also
You're right. Maybe he couldn't see who they were, but it's not. He doesn't say which is which. He says, "Who are they?"
Yeah,
I don't know. That was kind of a joke. I guess
well,
it's
dealing with that, losing sight, but also Jacob is rectifying by choosing. He was younger, and he's choosing the youngest one now.
Okay. All right. Yes, Carrie.
Well, I think the reason he chooses these two is because they are the son of Joseph. They are the sons of Joseph, and Joseph is the son of Rachel.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So there's that huge favoritism. We've got to pass that on. And then the other aspect is
worse.
yeah, the other aspect is we're always going to care more about the second born because he's the one in the vulnerable position. He's the oppressed, and he himself was the second born. And so there.
I agree.
Okay, but all right, yes, Pamela.
I just have a question. So does this mean that the laws of primogeniture then don't pass to the firstborn and go to the secondborn?
No,
or
only in these particular instances, in this one part of the Torah, in this book of Genesis, does it seem like the youngest always surpasses the oldest. But no, in normal Torah, Judaism, or whatever, no, it's yeah.
But for these two, is it the case that the younger, that he's actually changing those rules? Or, well, here's my thought is, if the first one gets all the land and the money, but the younger one then gets all the power. But I don't know, so that they're inextricably in. So I'm just trying to, if you can bifurcate those two things where one gets this and the other gets that, and it kind of balances it out.
Well, some of it's a blessing, like this is a blessing. I'm blessing you with that he's going to be greater. It's kind of a prediction. Your nation, that in the Torah, your descendants are going to be greater than his descendants. It's more about that. Even with Esau and Jacob, though, when Jacob got the blessing that was meant for Esau, you get double holdings, and you are like the head of the clan, or so to speak, the next head of the family. So, but it seems that they, over and over, the youngest in the book of Genesis, every single time the youngest son prevails or gets the blessing, so to speak. So
May I ask a question, Rabbi?
yeah,
What about if there's 2 girls and there's no boys?
well, that's actually the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, where they went to Moses, this is in the desert, and said, they were handing out all the holdings for all the tribes. And they said, our father's dead. We have no brother. We should not be excluded. And Moses didn't even know what to say. Never heard of such a thing. He goes to God and God says, they're right. Give it to them. So that was a huge, thing. Well,
Thank you.
that's it. But okay, Penina, you're muted.
All right. 2 things I want to bring up. We're starting with the name now because you're talking about it. The name had meaning. Everybody who was named, the name itself,
Right. They all had
had a meaning. Joseph's children, one of them was named for God taking them away from the land that's supposed to be his, Menashe.
Okay.
Lenashet is like to take him away from the rights.
Okay.
And the other one was
Ephraim.
Ephraim is come from the word to be fruitful, to reproduce.
From right.
Yeah. And the name, I think, because the whole storyline in the Bible, there is a big importance and the meaning of the names.
Yeah.
So I think Jacob is putting his bet on the one who was blessed with a name that will mean that he's going to be multiplying and becoming the nation, when the other one means that you are out of your land, out of your country.
That's interesting.
I think that it has the name in those days had a very big importance.
Had a power, like
And
the name had a power.
Exactly.
Like your name
Yes.
imbued your character. Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting.
So who you're gonna
A
be.
good name, a good name.
Now with the coat, I'm going back to the coat of many color. We were talking before that the coat showed status. And here Joseph was given a coat of many colors.
Right.
In other words, you are supposed to expect already that his life is going to be multicolored.
Oh, that's interesting.
He is going to have all kind of things happening to him, and he's going to react in all different kind of situations with different way. And that's the multicolor. It wasn't just a story. It has a meaning.
Symbolic.
Just like the name said, the coat that's supposed to be the status shows you right away that you're not going to see a boring man here. There is going to be a lot of things happening that are going to evolve around this Joseph, that will show you different ways of character, different points in different times of his life. When he's a boy, he's a Schwitzer, he shows up and then he cares about them, and then he cares about the father. He didn't care for him.
He has a lot of emotions. It's the end. So I love that.
All these things that are happening to him.
That's great. I just want to conclude with,
we were told in the beginning that that's what's going to happen.
Richard Friedman, who wrote this book called Who Wrote the Bible, analyzes the writers of the Bible. There's the theory that if you're not like ultra Orthodox, that 4 different writers wrote different parts of the Torah. We're talking about the Torah. And he says that the reason that the youngest prevailed in all of these stories is that the youngest symbolized the Jewish people or the land of Israel, or the small, tiny little nation that was surrounded by these huge civilizations, Egypt, Assyria, Iran, Persia, Babylonia. So it was the youngest, it was the smallest, and it was a way of symbolically saying, this one was blessed by God, this one has the blessings, this one will prevail, this one will last. And so it was like this subliminal story about, yes, you're the smallest, but you have the blessing, is what he suggests is in that. So I thought that was very interesting. And I think this is a great discussion. Shabbat Shalom. It's a
Thank you, Rabbi.
to study Torah with you.
Yeah.
And
Shabbat Shalom.
if I don't see you, happy 2022. And may this
Oh.
next year bring us health and strength and
Yes.
more of an open world.
Yes.
Amen.
Love you.
Bye, everyone.
Oh,
Thank
bye, darling.
you.
Be well. Oh.
Bye, Susan.
Bye.